The working clearance requirements in front of electrical equipment are essential for ensuring the safety of personnel who may need to inspect, service, or maintain the equipment. These clearances provide enough space to work safely, reducing the risk of electrical shock, arc flash, and other hazards. The specific clearance requirements vary depending on the voltage of the equipment, the type of installation, and the applicable electrical codes and standards. While the provided answer mentions a 12-inch clearance for a 24 volts direct current panel, it is crucial to understand that this might not always be the complete picture. Different codes and specific installation scenarios might dictate larger clearances. Let's delve into the factors that influence working clearance requirements and how to determine the correct clearance for various situations. Firstly, it's important to understand the purpose of working clearance. It's not just about having enough room to stand. It's about providing a safe zone where qualified personnel can perform their tasks without undue risk. This includes tasks such as opening enclosures, taking measurements, tightening connections, and replacing components. Adequate clearance also allows for the use of tools and equipment needed for these tasks. Secondly, several factors affect the specific working clearance requirements. The voltage of the electrical equipment is a primary consideration. Higher voltage equipment generally requires greater clearances. The configuration of the equipment, such as whether it is exposed or enclosed, also plays a role. The presence of grounded surfaces or other obstructions near the equipment can also affect the required clearance. Thirdly, the National Electrical Code, or NEC, is a widely adopted standard for electrical installations. It provides detailed requirements for working clearances in Article 110.26. This article specifies minimum clearances based on voltage and the conditions of the installation. It's important to consult the latest edition of the NEC to ensure compliance. Article 110.26 addresses working space about electrical equipment. It dictates the minimum clear depth of working space in the direction of access to live parts, the minimum width of the working space, and the minimum height of the working space. The depth of the working space is determined by the voltage to ground and the condition of the installation. Condition 1 exists where there are exposed live parts on one side of the working space and no grounded parts or grounded parts insulated or guarded on the other side of the working space. Condition 2 exists where there are exposed live parts on one side of the working space and grounded parts on the other side of the working space. Condition 3 exists where there are exposed live parts on both sides of the working space. For voltages of 0 to 150 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 3 feet for condition 1, 3 feet for condition 2, and 3 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 151 to 600 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 3 feet for condition 1, 3.5 feet for condition 2, and 4 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 601 to 2500 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 4 feet for condition 1, 4.5 feet for condition 2, and 5 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 2501 to 9000 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 5 feet for condition 1, 6 feet for condition 2, and 6 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 9001 to 25,000 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 6 feet for condition 1, 8 feet for condition 2, and 9 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 25,001 to 40,000 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 8 feet for condition 1, 10 feet for condition 2, and 12 feet for condition 3. For voltages of 40,001 to 75,000 volts to ground, the minimum clear depth of working space is 10 feet for condition 1, 12 feet for condition 2, and 15 feet for condition 3. The width of the working space must be at least 30 inches, but in no case less than the width of the equipment. The height of the working space must be at least 6.5 feet, or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. These dimensions ensure that there is adequate space for personnel to work safely and effectively. It's worth noting that these are minimum requirements, and in some cases, it may be necessary to provide even greater clearances to ensure safety and accessibility. For example, if the equipment is located in a confined space or if there are other obstructions nearby, it may be necessary to increase the working clearance. The NEC also addresses specific requirements for dedicated equipment space in Article 110.26e. This section requires that the space above and below electrical equipment be kept clear of obstructions that could interfere with the safe operation or maintenance of the equipment. Specifically, the space above the equipment must be clear to a height of 6 feet above the equipment or to the structural ceiling, whichever is lower. The space below the equipment must be clear to the floor. These requirements help to ensure that there is adequate space for personnel to access and work on the equipment without being hindered by obstructions. In the case of a 24 volts direct current panel, the voltage to ground is relatively low. However, it is still important to provide adequate working clearance to ensure safety. While 12 inches might seem sufficient at first glance, it's essential to consider the specific installation conditions and any applicable local codes or regulations. Depending on the specific circumstances, a greater clearance might be required. For example, if the panel is located in a damp or wet location, a greater clearance might be necessary to reduce the risk of electrical shock. Similarly, if the panel is located in a hazardous location, such as a Class 1, Division 1 or 2 area, additional precautions and clearances might be required. Furthermore, it's important to remember that working clearance is not just about the space in front of the equipment. It also includes the space to the sides and above the equipment. This space is needed to allow personnel to move around the equipment and access all of its components. The NEC specifies minimum clearances for these areas as well. The NEC also addresses the issue of access to working space in Article 110.26c. This section requires that there be at least one entrance to a working space that is of sufficient size to allow personnel to enter and exit the space safely. The entrance must be kept clear and unobstructed at all times. In general, the door needs to be at least 24 inches wide and 6.5 feet tall. In addition to the NEC, other codes and standards may also apply to working clearance requirements. For example, the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, publishes several standards that address electrical safety, including NFPA 70E, Standard for Electrical Safety in a Workplace. This standard provides guidance on safe work practices for electrical personnel, including requirements for working clearance. It is important to consult all applicable codes and standards to ensure compliance. Moreover, local jurisdictions may have their own electrical codes and regulations that are more stringent than the NEC. It is important to check with the local authorities to determine the specific requirements for working clearance in your area. To determine the appropriate working clearance for a 24 volts direct current panel, follow these steps. Firstly, identify the voltage to ground of the equipment. In this case, it is 24 volts direct current. Secondly, determine the condition of the installation. Is there exposed live parts on one side of the working space and no grounded parts or grounded parts insulated or guarded on the other side of the working space, which would be condition 1? Or are there exposed live parts on one side of the working space and grounded parts on the other side of the working space, which would be condition 2? Or are there exposed live parts on both sides of the working space, which would be condition 3? Thirdly, consult the NEC Table 110.26a to determine the minimum clear depth of working space based on the voltage to ground and the condition of the installation. For 24 volts direct current, this will likely fall under the 0 to 150 volts range. Fourthly, ensure that the width of the working space is at least 30 inches, but in no case less than the width of the equipment. Fifthly, ensure that the height of the working space is at least 6.5 feet, or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. Sixthly, consider any other applicable codes, standards, or local regulations that may impose more stringent requirements. Remember that these are minimum requirements, and it may be necessary to provide even greater clearances to ensure safety and accessibility. Always err on the side of caution and provide ample space for personnel to work safely. In addition to the physical dimensions of the working space, it's also important to consider the environmental conditions. For example, if the equipment is located in a hot, humid, or dusty environment, it may be necessary to provide additional ventilation or cooling to prevent overheating. Similarly, if the equipment is located in a corrosive environment, it may be necessary to protect it from corrosion. Maintaining adequate working clearance is an ongoing responsibility. It's not enough to simply provide the required clearance during the initial installation. The working space must be kept clear of obstructions at all times. This means that equipment, materials, and other items must not be stored in the working space. Regular inspections should be conducted to ensure that the working space is free of obstructions and that the required clearances are maintained. If any obstructions are found, they should be removed immediately. In summary, while 12 inches might be a starting point for considering working clearance in front of a 24 volts direct current panel, a comprehensive understanding of the NEC local codes and specific installation conditions is paramount. Factors such as voltage to ground, condition of the installation, and the presence of obstructions all play a role in determining the appropriate working clearance. By following the guidelines outlined in the NEC and other applicable standards, it is possible to ensure that electrical equipment is installed and maintained safely.